Okay, playing with these controls. If you're all with us last week, I'm talking with my mic. There it is. Lost Jolie. Yeah, a couple minutes while we wait. If you were with us while we did it last week, another phone come in. Tried to go live on Facebook and seemed to work okay. It was just a little confusing for me because I have the Zoom meeting on one screen. I had the Facebook Live on another, and I think people were trying to interact and comment through Facebook Live, and that was kind of throwing me off a little bit. So what we've done, our meeting last week for our regular monthly normal meeting, and also now tonight, we're doing a YouTube Live versus a Facebook Live. My main reason for doing that is most of our meetings I was processing through, maybe even adding a little bit of titling and such like that, and uploading our meetings to YouTube anyway to share with the world. So if you haven't already, find Lowcountry NORML on YouTube and subscribe. But it's an easier way for me to archive them right out on YouTube onto our channel versus trying to do it on Facebook, record them on Zoom, pull that recording from Zoom into my video editing software, sit through the whole thing again while I'm sort of dropping in links or titling and that kind of stuff. So it goes out kind of raw to YouTube, but without the titling and things like that, but it is what it is. Oh, I see somebody else coming in to join us here. So we will be streaming live now to YouTube tonight. And again, if anybody happens to miss our meeting, they can always follow up and view it there. Excuse me while I'm kind of looking away from the camera. I've got some other messaging coming in on another screen. And we're almost there. 7:01, my clock is showing. Let's give it another minute or two. And then we should be good to go. Bear with me just another minute here. All right, let's see. I just have to move a couple of screens around so I can see what's going on. Where did that just go? Oh, there it is. Okay. I lost the whole menu. If anybody needs to speak, you can unmute yourself, I believe. There should also be a raise hand icon if you're having trouble, if you're viewing this on a computer or if you're through a Zoom app. There is the chat section. You're able to maybe send a message to if you have a comment you want to make but don't want to make it vocally. And otherwise, we're still trying to work out all the bugs with Zoom and figure out how all the different things work, but we're moving along pretty well. I do see we've clicked the 7:02, so I'm not going to drag us on any longer. I want to thank you all for joining us here.
Scott, I'm here. Can you see me?
See if I can find the one I'm looking for. As I do with our normal meetings, I'm going to start our Zoom meetings, these conversations the same way. All of these meetings are an environment of education and awareness. These are not an open market for the sale, purchase, or distribution of cannabis. We do not encourage or condone illegal behavior of any kind. Welcome everybody who's here with us this evening, and also welcome any viewers that might be watching this later on YouTube. I'm still fighting with little menus on my screen. This is South Carolina Cannabis Conversation Online. This is our second edition, I guess you would call it. We premiered with this last week. had a nice little chat. You can view it out on somewhere on Lowcountry NORML's Facebook page. Unfortunately, I can't send you our YouTube link. We have two featured speakers with us tonight. We have Jolie Moyer out of Ohio, who'll be speaking a little bit about the voter initiative referendum petitions we've been trying to circulate and how they've been doing with them up in Ohio. Pretty well. I'm not sure how many municipalities that they have now, but we'll be chatting with her in just a few minutes. Also with us this evening, we have Jill Swing from the South Carolina Compassionate Care Alliance. And unfortunately, last week, I didn't speak very well on what was going on with the act, just because I haven't been keeping up with it. I believe last we all know is the last hearing was canceled due to the pandemic. And after that, I don't know if there's been any activity, discussion, or if it's just sort of gone by the wayside with the disruption in our legislature this season. So Jill will be able to answer those questions for us and hopefully tell us where the act is moving in the future. Jill, thank you for joining us.
Hey, Scott, how are you? Thank you so much for inviting me to join you this evening.
At the moment, though. I see your mic is off. Give me 1 second.
It's on, yeah.
I bet you I know what it is. Hi, Jill.
How's that? Can you hear me now?
That's much better. Different
okay.
headphones. Right. Thank you for joining us.
We're still working out the technology on these Zoom things, and anyway, so no worries. But I appreciate you inviting me to be here to talk a little bit about obviously the Compassionate Care Act. I know you just said, where we are on that, and then of course any other questions or discussion any of the followers would like to ask, I'm here, and hopefully, we can have a good discussion. Just to give everyone a tiny bit of background, those who don't know me and how I got involved in medical cannabis advocacy. Scott, if that's okay, if you'll allow me just to do like a little brief introduction.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Yeah, so I have 12-year-old boy-girl twins, and my daughter, Mary Louise, has cerebral palsy and epilepsy. And in 2013, two things happened. One is her neurologist at MUSC basically told us that we didn't have any other options in controlling her seizures. They were very much not controlled. She's having hundreds of seizures a day. We had tried multiple medications, multiple combinations of medications, special diets. We had taken her to specialists up and down the East Coast, and no one really had any answers for us. The other thing that happened in 2013 was I saw this special on CNN by Sanjay Gupta called Weed. I'm sure many of you are familiar, but he talked about or featured a little girl in Colorado whose parents gave her an oil that was derived from the cannabis plant that was low in THC and high in CBD, and that essentially saved her life. It stopped her seizures immediately, and then over time she saw a significant decrease. She was not seizure free, but she was going from 30 to 40 tonic-clonic seizures a day to maybe a couple in a month. So that is life changing for that little girl and for her family, of course. And so during that time, a lot of parents like myself who had run out of options started looking at two things. One, either moving out to Colorado. That's not feasible for everybody, but a lot of people did pack up their families or split their families and move to Colorado so they could have access. The other option was to fight at home for legislation, and that's what we did. So in 2014, the CBD bill was introduced and passed that very same year. And I've been thinking a lot about this and why that was so quick and easy, and why a very, very restrictive medical cannabis bill just has not gotten the momentum needed to pass in both chambers in South Carolina. And I think what it was, part of it was the legislators really weren't familiar with it. They didn't really know what it was. They got a little squeamish when they heard it was derived from the cannabis plant, but when they learned it was low in THC, you couldn't get high from it, and it would help children, they kind of latched onto it. The other thing the bill did was it didn't actually legalize anything, but what it did was it said something wasn't illegal under a few very specific circumstances. So it was a relatively easy lift. And the other thing that happened the same year was the hemp bill was passed, which removed hemp, which is defined as cannabis with less than 0.3% THC from the definition of marijuana within the state. So ultimately, we actually all ended up treating under the hemp bill really more so than the CBD bill, just because the ratios of THC and CBD weren't really accessible. And it was very much still a black market, wild, wild west situation, because there was no cultivation at the time. Even in the hemp bill, there was no cultivation allowed. So access was nearly impossible. It forced moms like me and moms in states across the country that passed similar legislation onto the black market. So we were networking through social media for the most part, or through friends of friends of friends of friends. And we were accessing products that we didn't even know whether they were fit for human consumption, let alone whether they would have any therapeutic benefits for our children. And we were paying, astronomical prices for these products, because it was at the time, even though it was hemp, at the time it was still federally illegal. And so crossing state lines with that was a felony. So anyone who sent us anything from another state where it was legal, they were taking huge risks. So, it was a chaotic time. And I think from that experience, I learned one of the most vital issues is that every state is an island, at least until there is a change on the federal level. And that in-state cultivation, processing, and definitely regulation is what would be needed in order for patients like my daughter to have access to cannabis medicine that they needed. I also learned that cannabis isn't just for epilepsy, but for a lot of other medical conditions where pharmaceutical drugs just aren't successful in treating their symptoms. So I did serve in 2014. Part of the CBD bill created a medical marijuana study committee, and I served on that committee as a public representative. And we heard testimony around the state. And once the committee wrapped up their testimony period, there was a bill that was created that was the first comprehensive medical cannabis bill. And it wasn't even called the Compassionate Care Act. It was simply called the South Carolina Medical Marijuana Bill. No fluff. And that was in 2015. So here we are in 2020. And for those of you who aren't familiar with our legislative session, our legislative session is 2 years. And they meet from the second Tuesday in January through the second Thursday in May. So every bill has 2 years or 2 sessions in order to make its way through the legislative process, which includes going through a committee process in both the House and the Senate before it goes to the governor's desk for a signature. So the first bill, saw some mild success. It got out of subcommittee in the Senate side, and that was about as far as it got. About the same situation on the House side. So in 2017, 15, 16, 17, we got a little more organized. That's when I formed my advocacy organization, South Carolina Compassionate Care Alliance. And, from 2 years worth of testimony and 2 years worth of hearing what our lawmakers thought about medical cannabis and the questions and the concerns that they had, we introduced a new bill. that again just didn't get very far through the process. And in 2019, we had really high hopes that, it takes a little while to educate these guys. And so we were hopeful that we would get the bill passed in the first half of this legislative session, knowing that going into 2020, it would be a little harder lift because every single one of our state legislators is up for election this year. And even though the polling statewide, both Republicans and Democrats, show that they support medical cannabis legalization, for whatever reason, a lot of our lawmakers are very squeamish on this issue, and they don't want to have to vote on it during an election year. And that's something that we keep hearing time and time again. Well, it's an election year. We don't really want to take that up. Nobody wants to go on record. It's an election year. So we felt that if we didn't get it passed pretty early in 2019, that 2020 would be a challenge. Well, we didn't really realize what a challenge was going to be ahead of us in 2020. But as you all know, our session was cut very short because of COVID and the pandemic, and the state legislature has essentially been shut down. I mean, they've met a few times to, they had to adopt the sine die resolution, which ends session essentially. They've also had to do some COVID related things, some budgetary things. They had to extend the budget because they hadn't passed the budget yet. And that is one of the key functions of our legislature, is passing our state budget. So there were some things that they had to do to keep our government moving, and like I said, some COVID related things. But beyond that, they're really not taking up any bills at this time. I mean, they've essentially finished for the year. I know they've got a couple of minor hearings in the next, I think this week there are a couple that I've seen. And then in September, I think they're gonna be taking up the budget. But essentially, the Compassionate Care Act, as we know it, is done for this session, which means that we will be going back to the drawing board. We'll be going back in 2021 now with a new version of the bill. So that's kind of where we are today.
Excuse me. Yeah, I thought I had seen somebody else had mentioned that the bill will be pretty much going back to the drawing board. I'm assuming Senator Davis, well, you said all seats are up for election. Is he have anybody running against him in his district?
He does have a Democratic challenger, and for the first time since he's been in office in 2009, he has opposition. So yeah, he does have an opponent this time.
As the incumbent, if he retains his seat, I'm assuming he'd be happy to, again, go ahead and sponsor the bill and move forward with it. Is that what you're hoping for the most part?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that he pretty much, because of his just phenomenal support of the bill, and he's really taken a leadership role from day one, both in drafting the legislation itself and then in championing it through from day one. He pretty much owns this bill. I mean, and he has been well respected among his colleagues for his passionate support. And he continues to gain support from his colleagues because he's just been so tenacious and so willing to really spend a lot of his own political capital trying to get this piece of legislation passed. And also in working with opposition, working with SLED, working with the South Carolina Medical Association, working with the Highway Patrol, and trying to address any and all possible concerns. So he's put a tremendous amount of time and effort into this piece of legislation. So, of course, we're, hopeful that he will get reelected, and I'm certainly anticipating that. He's very popular in his district. So I can't imagine, I can't foresee an issue, where he wouldn't return, but certainly I think he'll be our champion, as we go into 21.
With Pete McCoy, I guess, moving on to new position, is there a legislator sort of spotlighted for writing a co-bill to go along with this, a sister bill, as we, I guess, would say.
Yeah, so we call them, we refer to them as a companion bill.
Companion bill.
And that's actually a great question, one that I don't have a concrete answer on, because again, Peter McCoy has been our primary sponsor in the House for 2 sessions on this bill. So with him being gone, you know, the nice thing is we do have a lot of support on the House side. So what I am hoping is that on the House side, instead of having one champion who takes that bill and carries it through and really nurtures it and makes sure that it gets goes through the process. What I am anticipating, or what I'm hoping, is that we will have a solid group of multiple sponsors on the House side who are eager to see the bill passed. A lot of, like I said, everyone's up for election, and we're going to see a lot of turnover in the House, either because members aren't running again, or because they've had some pretty strong opposition. And just with the political climate right now, I see that there's going to be some change of seats. And so one of the things South Carolina Compassionate Care Alliance did this election cycle was we sent out a survey to every single person running for either the House or the Senate. And we asked them 5 questions, or we gave them 5 statements, and they either had to agree, disagree, or they could be undecided on their position for medical cannabis. And one of the questions we asked was, or the statement we proposed to them was, if elected, I would like to propose, sponsor, or co-sponsor a comprehensive medical cannabis bill in South Carolina. And we had overwhelming support from those who completed our survey. So now that we have that information and we kind of have it down on paper, that there are a lot of House members or prospective House members who are willing to sponsor the bill, then once elections are over in early November, we are going to turn to them and say, and obviously once the new version of the bill has been drafted, then we will turn to them and say, here's our bill, we would like for you to put your signature on it. So I do think that it's going to be a little bit different approach in the House. The thing is, we know we've got the votes to get the bill passed. It's not about the votes on the floor. It's about getting the bill through the process. And there has to be a legislative will in order to make that happen. And that's where our challenge has been. That's where we get hung up every time, because we have to have hearings on a timely basis. I mean, we really got hung up even on the House side this past session, because I think we were 2 months into session before you even had a hearing. And then we had the hearing. It was a 3-hour hearing, and they didn't even take a vote on the bill. And I found out later they had no intention of taking a vote on the bill, that they were trying to stall it. So there are a lot of tactics that they can use to delay a piece of legislation. So it's very easy for it to get hung up in the legislative process and not move. So the more support we have from the more members, the more pressure they're going to put on leadership to move this bill. So that's kind of what we're hoping we're going to see in 21.
You kind of answered my question before I got a chance to ask it, because I was going to ask you a bit about your survey, but I got more questions.
Great.
Did you have a pretty good, strong response, approximately percentage-wise?
Yeah, and I wish I had done an actual count, but we had a very good response overall. What we did was we sent it out, and we got some immediate responses, but then they kind of started teetering off. So we sent it out again, and we said, hey, if you're receiving this, we haven't received your response. And we did have a couple of people who there was some we had a few bounce backs where there was either a typo from our end, or we had to get all of their email addresses off of their filing for their seat. And a lot of those are handwritten. They're very difficult to read. So we couldn't always decipher their, Sanskrit writing on their application. So there were some challenges with some of the email addresses. And a couple of people didn't even put an email address down at all. So we did have a few bounce back. So we sent it out again. And then the ones we didn't have email addresses, we called them and said, hey, we've sent this out. We would like to have your email address so we could send it to you as well and give you the opportunity to respond. So we got a few more. And then when we started getting close to the primary, we still had a lot of holes. And we realized that there were some races where we had one person who responded, but their opponent didn't. And so that seems a little bit unfair when we've got someone who, responded and the other person's no response. So the no response, it kind of just makes them look bad because they didn't respond. And they may have been supportive, we don't know, or they may have not been. And if they're not, then if they look bad, that's their problem, not ours. So we called every single individual a couple times, actually, those that were at least in the primaries. And, except for, maybe a few exceptions, we got responses from pretty much everybody.
Oh, wow. Great.
And so we'll do that again, too, when we get down to the general election. Like I said, there are about 350 candidates running for office between the House and the Senate. So, like I said, we focus mainly on those who had primaries. And then it'll be, 170 times 2, but not all of them have challengers. So, I mean, I don't know what the number is, but anyway, we'll be following up with everyone, and those who didn't respond who have a general or have a race in the general, we'll be following up with them when that gets a little closer. So we'll have a little bit better idea of where people are on the issue.
Excellent. Excellent. I appreciate that. Does anybody else have any questions for Jill? Give me a little hand wave or unmute yourself and chime in. While we're on the
Scott,
topic,
one thing I would like to touch on, just for anybody who's watching who may not be aware, MUSC has been doing medical cannabis conferences for the past couple of years, and I've been working very closely with them on that as far as lining up speakers and getting exhibitors there. And it's a really, really big deal. I think I only know of one other medical school on the East Coast that does these full CME accredited conferences, and that's Harvard. So it's a really big deal that MUSC has embraced this issue, and that doesn't mean they are pro-pot, but what it means is they are pro-education. And so they want to provide information about medical cannabis to the physicians, at MUSC and across the state and even, across the Southeast. So they will be hosting a half-day CBD conference October 2nd. And I've posted the link on my website, and I'm happy to share with you so you can get it out to your folks. So it's a half-day specific to CBD. And the reason why they wanted to focus on that is because the feedback we got from last September's annual conference was that there are a lot of physicians who have patients who are either currently using CBD or are coming to them and saying, hey, I have arthritis, will CBD help me? And unfortunately, the physicians just don't have an answer for their patients. They don't know about it. But in the meantime, you can buy CBD oil on any, grocery store shelf or, practically any gas station you pass by on the road. So it's so prolific, but yet the physicians don't know, will it be beneficial for my patient? Are there potential drug interactions? Are there, potential side effects that the patients need to be advised on? So the fact that that MUSC is taking up this issue, I think is really exciting. I really would encourage anyone, it's not just for physicians, but anyone can attend. And like I said, it's October 2nd. It will be a half-day conference. It starts at, I think, 1 p.m., 1 in the afternoon. and goes to about 4:30. And then our full day, full medical conference will be, I believe it's the last Friday in January. So that's forthcoming. But, you know, I just want to at least point that out and let you know that that's really exciting for the state of South Carolina that this is happening. So I want to make sure we get people in attendance.
Anybody's got chat, and I've dropped the link to that event, to those, actually the half day and the full day events in the chat window. Copy and save that, or click on out to it and save that in your browsers.
Right.
We've also shared some information on that, I believe, on Lowcountry NORML's Facebook page. And as the event gets closer, I'm sure we'll remind you again as well, folks. So,
absolutely.
All right. That's the main questions I have right now on Compassionate Care Act and what you guys are doing at Compassionate Care Alliance. I love the fact that you're sending the surveys out to our candidates as they're moving forward, and the fact that they're actually responding. I'll follow up with you again a little bit later in the season with that. Other legislation, and we had about 20 pieces of legislation total in South Carolina at the state level. I believe 3 of them were kind of identical decrim bills. One of them finally got like 2 co-sponsors, but they weren't really going anywhere at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Scott, honestly, I think you're going to see a little more interest in decrim as we go into 21, just with, you know, the current, you know, racial divide and, you know, this attention that's been drawn to, you know, the racial disparity and incarceration. I think that is something that is going to be very there's going to be a lot more interest in that particular issue as we go into 21.
Yes,
I've spoken to a lot of people who are running for office, and, you know, the typical response I used to always get was, well, I support medical, but I don't support recreational. Now I support medical. I'd like to take a look at decriminalization, or even I support decriminalization, but I don't support recreational use. So, you know, I think that is a topic that's going to get a whole lot more attention as we go into next session than has I mean, there have been decrim bills that have been introduced since 2015, as far as I know. Maybe before then, that got zero traction. Right. Zero traction. But I do think that's going to be one to kind of keep an eye on. So.
Yes. Yeah. I think going into the 2021, 2022 session, that will be something to watch at the legislative level. So crossing our fingers for next session, see if we can get a medical bill that works for everybody, and get decrim moving forward. If it doesn't happen at state level, we're still kind of moving forward with our voter initiative process in the Charleston area to get referendums on local ordinances going. And we know of Attorney Johnny McCoy up in Myrtle Beach, who has just proposed one to Myrtle Beach's City Council a couple weeks back. So we're not sure what kind of traction he's getting on that, but that was a result of a shooting of a suspect over $100 cannabis worth of cannabis, 65 shots, I believe, fired, hit 9 times, permanently paralyzed. And I'm going to mess up his name again. I think it's Leighton Benton, but I forget exactly his name. But he's one who wanted to see change in his town, in his city, so it doesn't happen to anybody else. And Mr. McCoy was his attorney, and so he's got him with proposing the ordinance. Little bit different than what we've been trying to do, following the lead of the folks at the Sensible Movement Coalition in Ohio. We have with us Jolie Moyer tonight. I see we've got her on mute here. Jolie, if you could unmute yourself and come on in and tell us a little bit about what's been going on in Ohio with
Scott, if I can be rude and interrupt before you bring Jolie in, one thing before you get away from DCRIM, I did have a meeting, a virtual meeting with the new head of the South Carolina ACLU, who's based in Charleston. And just as an FYI, they are interested in working on 3 markets for DCRIM, Charleston being one of them. Charleston, Orangeburg, and Columbia, I think, are the 3 areas that they are working on. And I did send him information about what's happening in Myrtle Beach as well. So that may be someone you would want to partner with too, if y'all are working on that issue.
Yeah, I
on the local level.
want to reach out. I think I may have met him back in December or before, briefly at a meeting. But then in April, I actually haven't reached out to anybody at ACLU since their report came out in April about the racial disparity in cannabis arrests throughout the nation.
Yeah, but certainly that's a hot topic and one you got to strike while the iron's hot. So anyway, all right, I'll let Jolie have her time. But thank you so much for having me join you this evening.
I really appreciate you joining us. Thank you, Jill.
Sure.
Bye-bye now. Jolie, you there with us?
I am here. Thank you for having me, Scott.
Welcome, welcome. How's life in Ohio?
Well, actually, I'm in Michigan at the moment. I'm still doing a lot of work in Ohio, but
okay.
I'm at the house in Michigan right now. And everything's going great. So we have our case. I think I may have spoken to you about it, in which we sued Governor Mike DeWine for our constitutional rights to collect signatures on our petitions. Due to COVID regulations, we were not able to go door to door and to see people face to face to get the signature. So we sued and asked for an extension to give us a little more time and also the ability to get those signatures electronically. And we did win that case. We were granted that. And so we got a program together in which to be able to get the petitions out electronically and get the signatures that way. And it turns out the state appealed it. So they won on appeal and put us back to step 1 with getting the physical wet signatures in person on the original timeline. So that case is actually now gone to the U.S. Supreme Court, and we're awaiting a decision. I believe Ohio has until Monday to respond. So we'll see what comes of that. Wish us luck on that. And other than that, it's go, I guess, for a lot of people. They're out there getting signatures right now on citizen initiatives, working on the sensible DCRIM, just like you are down there in South Carolina. We have multiple cities we were hoping to get on the ballot this year. And some of them will make it this year, and some of them will probably have to be put off till next year. But you were talking about DCRIM there in South Carolina, and I've been following a little bit about what's going on in other states. And I'm aware of what's going on in Myrtle Beach. And I think that it's great that DCRIM is being proposed. There's always been, it's been a good time, but there's no better time right now, because there's change happening all over the country. And this is one of the things that needs to be included in those conversations. Decriminalization of small personal amounts of cannabis should not be a crime. So I just want to take a minute to explain to the people that are not aware, there's a difference between what we consider a traditional decriminalization and what we refer to as sensible decrim. And the difference is a traditional decrim reduces the penalty to some extent. So it may take away jail time, and there might be a lower fine. So for example, the fine might be $50 or $100. And what we have found is in the states and in the places that have done a decrim like that, it's not effective. Ohio decriminalized in 1975, I believe. And nationally, the rate of racial disparity of arrest of blacks is 4 times the rate of arrest of whites. And that's a national average. In Ohio, the rate is even higher. So we have seen our cities in Ohio have this discussion in many places. We've done some cities by initiative, and we've also spoken to city councils in our largest cities and worked with them. And in most cases, they have enacted a sensible decrim, which reduces the fine to 0. So it doesn't just lower it, it reduces it to 0. It takes away the fine, it takes away the possibility of jail time, and it takes away the court cost. And that's huge. That's the difference. In a traditional decrim, the harm does not stop because the people are still being brought into the system over the small personal amounts. And if they don't pay their fine, they could have a warrant for their arrest. They could have to go to court. They could incur court costs. They could incur probation. They could lose their license. Many things could happen. They could lose their job. And in sensible decrim, when you take those things away, the only penalty left, because it's not legalization, it's still illegal. So if they wanted to charge, they could, but they won't get a fine and they won't get a court cost. It would all be on their dollars. And we have found that it just creates an atmosphere of non-enforcement, the same as jaywalking does. So jaywalking is technically illegal, but I don't know anybody that's being charged with jaywalking. It's not a thing that you hear about. It just doesn't happen. Generally, it just doesn't happen. And that's what we're seeing in our decrim cities. So like our top 5 biggest Ohio cities are now all decriminalized, in addition to a dozen other cities in the state with sensible decrim. Over 2 million people in Ohio are protected with no fine, no jail time decrim. And we aren't seeing any negative reaction from that. We aren't seeing anything that people, some people were worried about, oh, well, there's just going to be people on the street smoking pot. And what about the teens? Their increased teen use. We're not seeing any of that. We're seeing that sensible decrim actually is solving the problems that it set out to solve, that they wanted decriminalization to solve in the first place. So it's very, very effective.
Now, you guys have been at this for a couple of years, and I know we've spoken before because you got me kind of started with the group a couple years back. And we've been fighting, I'm going to say, an uphill battle here in the Charleston area with it. And I'm not exactly sure what some of it is. I think Jill briefly touched on something earlier when she talked about cannabis refugees. There's a lot of times I may post or comments on something on one of our social media pages, and I'll have a response or a comment coming back and saying, I'm so glad I moved out of South Carolina to a legal state. I think that adds to our challenges of changing the laws here. It really does. And I also understand why people are moving. It's maybe not helpful to our cause here or the cause in general, but that may not be their concern. Their main concern is going to be their health, their well-being, that type of thing, and that's totally understandable. But I do have to kind of take some of those things into consideration in our battles here on, will we find the people to back us, support us, work with us? I've often had people will tell me they don't want to sign a petition because they don't want to get put on some list somewhere, like they're going to get on a CIA list of some sort.
Right.
But I digress slightly on that. When you guys were starting out a couple of years ago, what were some of the things that you did to get some help from volunteers in the local communities to rally around? And I got a couple other more specific questions later, but I'm going to start with that one.
Well, they just really did regular events and action meetings. It was done in conjunction with one of the NORML chapters, and they did a lot of social media activity. They did weekly action meetings in which they met and they planned and they gave people jobs, and they were actively working towards it. That was 2015 in Toledo, and that was one of our biggest cities in the state. So they actually did that first city by citizen initiative, which was a huge task. And they did a great job of it. It didn't happen overnight. It was, it was quite a battle, and they did it, and it was very successful. The former police chief, that was chief at the time, said it was the best thing that had happened for race relations between the law enforcement and the citizens in the time that he had worked there. So, I mean, that's a great thing to hear.
Now,
And since then, our other big cities, like I said, we have just gone into our biggest cities and spoken with city council members. We sent them emails, explained what it was, and if they showed some interest in hearing more, we met with them personally, and we've had great support. So we passed it in Columbus, Dayton, Cincinnati, and Cleveland that way. I'd like to see Akron take that step next. But we've done a lot of citizen initiatives in big cities all the way down to smaller townships and villages. And I understand when you're saying that you get people that are concerned about going on a list, and it's unfortunate, you can assure them that that's not the case. There is no secret, conspiracy to track them. I think just people don't understand that home rule allows this. This is their constitutional right to decide on an issue by ballot. And the petition is just part of that process. So the petition itself, maybe they don't understand that this isn't the only step. Signing the petition won't change the law. Signing the petition only gives them as voters the right to go vote on an issue.
Now, have you ever done any at a county-wide, or have they all been municipal level?
We have done them all at the municipal level, except for we did write a white paper that was submitted to the state. So we did try to give them some information to help them make a statewide decision that was wise. But there's a reason why we have not really targeted counties. In Ohio, I believe there's only a couple counties that could do that. And the cities within those counties would have the right to opt out, so to speak. So if we did go the county route, we would need more signatures than a city would. And once we submitted all those, we still would have to face the possibility that the cities within the county could opt out. So we've really targeted education more, which is what our organization does. We really just don't go out and do all the initiatives. We train local people that are interested in doing an initiative like this, how to do it. And we'll assist them if we can, to the extent that we're able to. But we really want people to understand that this is their right. It only takes a small amount of people, and it takes a small amount of money. This is not something that costs a lot of money like a statewide campaign would cost. A statewide initiative is a much bigger thing.
Okay. You also realize, I think Myrtle Beach had tried a sensible decrim petition a couple years back as well. I think they had some of the same challenges that we
Yeah, it
seem to
was
be
last
having.
summer. And it was last summer and it was great, but it's really like a door-to-door campaign there. In some places, we can kind of go out and draw the people out on the street. But, at Myrtle Beach with so many tourists, it really needs to be targeted to like registered voters within the city limits there at their homes. So it's really door-to-door. And I think that the local person that was working on that was interested in it, but just didn't really know how to draw in the people to assist.
Mm-hmm.
So they need a small team out there that's interested in that. And I know that they've got interest in decrim now. So I'm really hoping that they're open to a discussion about the value of sensible decrim versus a partial decrim.
Well, we face some of the same issues here, especially with our Folly Beach and Charleston being one of the top 5 tourist destinations in the world.
Right.
And also Charleston, the city of Charleston itself is kind of spread out and intermingled with, like my neighbor is in the town of James Island, but I'm in the city of Charleston. Then there's some unincorporated county property across the street. And this happens around a lot of the Charleston area. And North Charleston, just above us, about the same size, if not, I think Charleston actually is larger in population now. But it seems when you try and draw people out in this area, you get such a mix of the community that's why we're kind of considering maybe trying a county level. I'm really apprehensive of going in that direction. I think it's a big ask, especially since I've also been challenged in rallying support, even just on a small place like Folly. I think I've gotten a couple of better connections now. Of course, the pandemic hasn't helped any of that in the past few months for collecting signatures. We also had some students from the College of Charleston ready to go door to door with us. And then they shut down the college. So those things have sort of been kind of put on hold for us right now. We're looking to kind of renew it, restart it. And the one question somebody had asked me, and you may have the answer for this because I didn't get an answer from our local registration board, voter registration board. Do you know the deadline before an election on when the petitions need to be turned in?
I do not know South Carolina's deadline. I could probably look for that and get it fairly easy. I know in Ohio, we really only have a couple more weeks, and that's probably pushing it. We're shooting for sometime within the first week of July.
It may actually be 90 days in advance of an election day where you have to turn in.
Which is what it is, but we also have to give them time to go through the process, because if we turn ours into a city clerk, then it has to go to the Board of Elections and back, and then they have like maybe 10 days. So we have to account for a little bit of time for the process and everything. We don't want to miss our window. So
Main reason I'm asking now, I think, is just because I don't want to spend that energy trying to think, what am I going to do today? When really we're not going to be able to do anything until a little bit down the road. And we won't make at least this election cycle. My understanding, as long as the signatures and the addresses are still valid those petitions are still valid going forward, so we can use them in the future.
Absolutely. As long as they don't get too old, you don't want it to go too old. People move and their address changes. They may not update voter registration, things like that. But it's my understanding that you've got a pretty good start down there, and Folly Beach is really doable. Your window of time is running so short, but it's going to be close. Keep on plugging at it, because every little bit counts, and you'd be amazed at what I've seen get done, like I said, with just a small amount of people.
Well, I haven't given up on Folly. Like I said, my belief is we need 400 valid signatures, maybe even a little less than that. Um, the island just recently, of course, since the state's kind of opened up, has been flooded with tourists again. We're watching the backups on a daily basis, especially on the weekends. 45 minutes. I have my friends from Pennsylvania laugh at me and say, well, don't you just live in 5 miles from the beach, as I'm lounging in my little inflatable pool in my backyard? And I said, yes, but it's a holiday weekend. I'm not driving 45 minutes to get that 5 miles. I refuse to do it. But I think we're gonna be able to like light a new fuse in Folly, get that moving forward. And as these students come back on board, we're going to just, I think, set them loose on the city of Charleston and focus there. That's a much bigger chunk than Folly. I think we're about 15,000 signatures for that. But if I reach out to the ACLU, as Jill had mentioned a little earlier, we may be able to partner in this. It's nice to see that they've definitely gotten on board over the past few months.
Ohio has been great. We've talked with them and met with them several times, and they've been very supportive. So I think it'll go well. You know, you have really valid reasons for these decrems, and they're very important, and it's resolves a huge issue as far as cannabis, personal amounts of cannabis go. It's not going to affect traffickers. It's not going to affect large felony amounts. But this is something that's long overdue. And especially with most of the states now have at least legal medical marijuana. And you guys are huge tourist destinations. You have people coming from all over the world to come and visit. And I just think it's a shame that people have to worry about coming to visit, you know, such a great place because of the cannabis laws. They don't want to be a criminal or potentially get in some major trouble over what's legal medicine in their own home state. Correct. So it's time now.
Well, all right. I think that that answers a lot of my questions at the moment. Is there anybody else that's in on the phone call this evening that has any questions for Jolie or comments about what they've been doing there in South Carolina? Sorry, up in Ohio. I can't read and talk at the same time. I'm not seeing any hands come up or anything at the moment. But Jolie, I want to thank you for joining us. And like I say, we're going to be doing this every week for the foreseeable future. I've scheduled them out till the end of the year on Zoom, and we'll probably continue that into the new year, because I think as Jill had also mentioned, we've got some options ahead of us even at the state level. Because people are a lot more aware of what's going on with the racial disparity in arrests. Jill, I see you back in. And
hey, I'm sorry. And I had to put my glasses on to read. Jolie, I did send you a message, and I can just share. If you wouldn't mind shooting Scott the language for the resolution, and if you Scott would forward it to me, just so.
Well, Scott's got the language. Are you talking about the local ballot initiative? Because he's got language for several areas that he's currently working on right now.
Correct. We have petitions for Charleston, town of James Island, and the city of Folly Beach. So I can send you a link to a PDF of one of those petitions that we're circulating.
So Myrtle Beach, the one that we have written for Myrtle Beach, looks just like that. And Ohio's initiatives, we also have other states. We have West Virginia and Missouri. We're also have some initiatives written there, but they look very similar. What we have done is we've just taken it as far as the law allows us. So in Ohio, that means we can affect misdemeanor amounts, but not felonies. And so we've taken it up to the full misdemeanor amount.
Okay. And then the other thing, because I know we're almost at the 1 hour mark, but I don't know if you were aware, but there's the, I always get this messed up, the CJCC, which is the Charleston County Criminal Justice. I forgot what the last two CCs are, but basically it's a group of about 24 different organizations. The ACLU is a part of it. And they have been looking at the prison population, specifically in Charleston County. They were awarded a sizable grant to research and do planning to reduce the prison population. So in 2015, the Charleston County Detention Center was built to house 600 inmates. At the time in 2015, they had 2,000. And so obviously that is a dire situation for a lot of reasons. So when they started looking at the prison population, what they discovered was that the vast majority of those inmates were incarcerated for simple possession of marijuana. And so what Charleston County and the police chief did was instruct his officers not to automatically arrest for simple possession, but to take into account the situation, you know, the amount that they were in possession of, and just issue a citation and not actually arrest them. So they did that for 2 years. And in 2017, the prison population had been reduced by 37% just by, now granted, you know, what I hear when I'm in Columbia all the time from law enforcement, we don't write the laws, we just enforce them. Well, in this case, they're just choosing not to enforce them. So they've sort of taken it upon themselves to create their own law, basically. But my point in all of that is that if you could get those folks and get the police on your side, meet with them, get them on your side to help you with city council, because basically they are doing this now, but it's not 100% across the board. It's based on the discretion of the officer. But they have already put this.
We're seeing this racial disparity. I hate to interrupt you, but we're seeing this huge racial disparity in arrest and just being pulled over and detained and investigated, you know, which in many cases leads to arrest. It leads to even unequal sentencing. And that's very concerning. I think it's great that they've reduced the numbers by like that, but the fact that it is just at the officer's discretion is
Yeah, so what is that?
You know?
I mean, if somebody throws a little attitude or some, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, okay, boom, come on with, you know, you're going with me. I mean, it's not really effective, but I guess my point is you might be able to find some unlikely allies in your effort to get this passed. So
last 2 seasons, that is coordinating council. So I will kind of take a little bit more, take a little closer look at that. Now, Mike, one more question for Jolie on this. The way they wrote it for Myrtle Beach, the current one, I guess was a proposal to the city council. Those are, I'm assuming, written differently than our petitions?
Yes. Yes, our petitions that we wrote are the sensible decrim. So it's to the fullest extent allowed by the law.
Well, I mean, besides the fact that the program's a little bit different, there was, the reason I'm asking is, could I just take, instead of my petition, take my petition to city council and say, hey, would one of you people want to sponsor and propose this?
Certainly. Really, all you need to do is just go speak to council. I really encourage it, because the worst they can tell you is no. And in many cases, it opens up the conversation in which you can educate them the difference between a partial decriminalization and a total sensible decrim, and how it's more effective to do it all the way. Do it right the first time. Don't don't baby step yourself into a position where you still have the reoccurring problems. If you can resolve it through such a small act as this, then by all means it should be done. But absolutely, I think you should go speak to city council, county council, anybody you can go speak to. Go down state house, speak to the senators, the House of Representatives. Like, go talk to everybody about it, because the more people that you open up this conversation to, the more likely it is that this conversation is going to continue when you leave. And they'll see the value of not only decriminalization, but a total decrim that pushes the non-enforcement, which resolves the problem. And with it not being legalized and just taking this step, because in many cases, they're like, if you take the fine completely away and you take the jail time away and you take the court costs away, what's to stop people from just going crazy and smoking everywhere? And we've had a little concern about that. And like I said, we don't see it. The reason is there's still a penalty. You still could be charged. You still could have that on your record. And there's nobody out there that's using marijuana that wants to have their marijuana taken. There's still a chance that if you're out there smoking in public, that the officer is going to come and say, that's illegal, I'm taking it.
And then
Even if they don't
it
trust
opens
you.
the door for searches, you know,
Right.
and that kind of thing.
But really what we're seeing in the cities like Toledo that, you know, have had this now for many years, several years, we're not seeing it being enforced. As long as it's a small amount, they're not making a deal out of it. Have a nice day, go on your way. If there are other offenses involved, like maybe a traffic violation or something, you can still be charged for the other offenses. And of course, if the quantity or whatever falls outside the decrim amounts, you could still be charged for that, certainly. So the officers have the discretion to charge, but for personal amounts, they're just not doing it.
All right. Thank you, Jolie. I appreciate your time and input tonight. I really do.
Absolutely, anytime.
And you know, say welcome to join us every Sunday as we kind of move forward. I'm still stammering a little bit because it's just I want to move forward, but I'm just a little apprehensive with even getting out of the house. Some of you I may have told not too long ago. I just had some surgery a couple of weeks back, and finally I'm kind of getting back on my feet and not as fatigued as I had been for the first half of the year. So actually the quarantine didn't keep me home much more than I was already keeping myself home because my health wasn't that great earlier in the year as it was. But I think we are going to have to probably in South Carolina take a multi-pronged approach to this and keep hammering at a medical bill at the state level. Two is look for hopefully some renewed effort and support for decrim at the state level. We do not have state level referendums, so at the municipal level, kind of get back to circulating our sensible decrim petitions, at least here locally. I may need to reach out to you, Jolie, to draft a couple of others. I know I'm getting people in North Charleston and some of the other towns that are right around Charleston, right here in the county. I don't, and I may just talk to you a little bit more later about your advice on targeting this particular county as a whole versus trying to hit each of those towns. But we'll chat off meeting on that a little bit later.
Absolutely, anytime. Get a hold of me anytime. I'm glad to help.
All right, appreciate it. And last but not least, I think the biggest thing we can do is keep up with the conversation, keep it going. So like I say, I'll be back here every Sunday, 7 p.m. Invite your supporters, invite your friends to come on out, see what they can do to kind of get involved and move this forward. I'd love to see a lot of volunteers coming out and saying, yes, we want to be signature collectors for the petitions. And I also want to see a way where, I don't know how much you guys have done it there in Ohio, but get that petition. I have it a little bit more buried than it should be on our website. I think more accessible and say, not only should you do sign this, but download it, print it out, sign it, fill out the affidavit on the back to be a collector, and go get some friends and family to sign it as well before you send it back to us.
Make sure they know they cannot sign their own petition.
Okay, they can't sign their own
That's the
petition.
case in Ohio, you might want to double check that down there.
I'll put that in as a hard rule just in case, just to be on the safe side. But yeah, otherwise, I'm assuming I would hope it would only disqualify their signature and not the whole petition, but I don't want
not take any chances.
I don't want to take any chances. Correct. But thank you. That's actually a good tip there. But I think that's what we're going to have to do is kind of just keep it here in South Carolina, all those different avenues. And of course, as Jill's quite aware and active at, educate the public, educate our legislators. We'll get it. We'll get there. We'll get there. Anybody else have a quick chime in before we finish up tonight? I'm going to kind of take a look here. Thank you from Teresa to everybody for the chat tonight. I think we're just going to wrap it up, call it an evening. We've been rambling for about an hour and some great information. We'll look for you next week, Sunday, 7 p.m. right back here, same link. Thanks again for joining. Bye-bye now.